Okay, we're 4 minutes in, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. My name is Tina Yin. I am the manager of the Standards and Assessment section here in EPA Region 9. The purpose of this session is to give you hot tips for developing and submitting approvable water quality standards for the purposes of the Clean Water Act. We know that some tribes have their own tribal water quality standards and that you use those on your own, and then others have TAS and are looking to get standards for Clean Water Act purposes. This is going to focus on that latter half, but we can touch base on how we might be able to support you if you're also working on standards for your own tribe's purposes. So we're going to go through quickly today to meet my team, the Region 9 Water Quality Standards Liaisons. We're going to give you a quick overview of the objectives of the Clean Water Act, like why we have standards, and then what constitutes standards. And again, this session is not to teach you the nitty-gritty of how to develop individual standards, but rather how you're going to get through the process, where to start, and hot tips for managing your process for going along the way. So we're going to give you an overview of the Water Quality Standards template, which is a great place to start, and resources and hot tips, as I said, for getting through our process. And we're hoping to have some time at the end for question and answers. So in terms of logistics, we have Danielle on the phone with us, on the Zoom with us, and she is going to be helping us moderate the questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and she will be tracking those and then grouping them, so we can try to get to any common themes, but we'll also try to invite you at the end to open your mics up to ask your questions. Please remember, if you could, to put your name and affiliation in the chat box as well, as we are trying to track who's interested in these sessions and who's getting information. So with that, I'm going to jump right in, Danielle, unless I forgot something.
No, you're good. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So one of the first things that we get when we're looking at water quality standards is, who do you call? So we get this question a lot, and so we thought this would be a great thing to put up front for you. And our very first hot tip of the day is, your water project officer is always here to help you. So these are the individuals who you're probably already familiar with, like Danielle, or they manage your grants to you, they work with your work plans and others, and they can always help you navigate our EPA system and help you find who you need to call. But I did want to take a moment to let you know that water quality standards review and approval actions are covered in my office, which is the Water Quality Standards and Assessment section. So again, my name is Tina Yin. I am the manager of the section. I have been here for almost 11 months now. So I am learning along the way. I may have met many of you when I briefly sat in Jason Brush's chair and worked with Danielle and others in the tribal section a few years ago. So I'm happy to be continuing to work with you here. So with that, I want to take a quick moment to introduce you to what we call our water quality standards liaisons. So what happens is, when we have packages, we want to make sure that you have one person to land and go to. And so each of the people in my office serve as liaisons, and they may be your liaison in the near future or already. So with that, I'd like to go quickly and ask my team to introduce themselves, let you know their experience working in standards, and if they are already working with any tribes, who they are. But as we now have ever increasing numbers of TAS tribes, we expect that my whole team will be working with all of you in the future. So with that, Matt Bolt.
Hi, I'm Matt Bolt. I am about 3 years into working in Region 9 with water quality standards, and then 2 years before that in Region 4 working with water quality standards. I liaise to Navajo. Hi, I see some of you are on the call. And then I also am slated to liaise with Wallapai. Thank you.
Is Deborah Denton join? Maybe she was not able to be here. She works in the Central Valley and does a lot of our toxicity work. Eric Dubinsky, did you join us?
I'm here. I'm Eric Dubinsky. I'm the liaison for the San Francisco Bay Regional Board. I joined about 7 months ago, so I'm the newest member of the team here.
Diane?
Hi, I'm Diane Fleck. I do the Southern California area, the 3 Southern California boards, 4, 8, and 9. And I've been doing water quality standards for 20 plus years.
And Terry Fleming, who is also our water quality standards coordinator.
Hi, I'm Terry. I've been working at EPA for about 29 years. I've been working on standards for about 12.
Dave? Giuliano, did you join?
I'm here. I'm Dave Giuliano. I've been with the agency over 20 years, been in water for about 15. And I'm the TMDL 303D coordinator. I am fairly new to standards, for a couple of years. Basically, I work with Nevada and with Regional Board 7, which is Palm Springs down to Imperial Valley. And some of the tribes that I've been working with lately are Rincon tribe, the 29 Palms tribe, and the Walker River Paiute. And I think there are some more in Nevada that I'll end up working with.
Great, thanks. Matt Mitchell.
Hi, I'm Matt Mitchell. I've been working at EPA for about 25 years, and most of the time that's been on water quality standards. Currently, for about 10 years, I've been liaison for the California Central Coast Board, the Central Valley Board, Lahontan, the Colorado River Basin. More recently, I was assigned as liaison to Bishop Paiute and Big Pine Paiute tribes.
And Susan Saucerman.
Hi, I primarily cover the North Coast region. I've worked with Klamath tribes, including the Hoopa, the Karuk, the Yurok, Quartz Valley, Rezigini, and further south, the Dry Creek Rancheria, and also working with the Quetzaldehi tribe. Hi, Jeff. I saw your hello to me. Glad to see you here. And I've been at EPA and water quality standards for about 20 years.
Well, I'm super excited that I've joined this great and knowledgeable team, and I look forward to working with all of your tribes as you move forward on standards. Our second hot tip of the day is to let you know that Terry Fleming, as our Region 9 Water Quality Standards Coordinator, he's always a good place to start. So we know a lot of tribes are new to standards and they may not have a liaison assigned yet. He will be your first stop and he'll help you get started. And then let us know when we need to make an assignment to make sure you have someone moving forward, but he can definitely be your first stop. So with that, I'm going to jump into just like reminding folks that the Clean Water Act opens with setting the objective that waters shall be fishable and swimmable, and they should maintain the integrity of chemical, biological, and physical characteristics necessary to support those fishable and swimmable uses. So again, water quality standards are really the linchpin of the Clean Water Act, and all of our programs do revolve around them when it comes to regulation and others. And so, but when Congress established water quality standards, they were very explicit in the act that said that states and tribes should have the authority, states and authorized tribes, so those with TAS, should have the authority to determine what they want the uses of their waters to be, as well as what criteria should be protective of those uses. Again, setting the baseline as being you must have fishable and swimmable uses and criteria that protect those uses. So, and then every 3 years, you should look at the Act also establishes the expectation of a triennial review. So this is every 3 years, you take a look at your standards and see if there are any that you need to revise or update or change based on changing the situation or new recommended science and criteria. So again, if you have questions, we're going to get to them at the end, so please do put them in the chat box. We're going to move through this a little quickly so that we can try to accommodate as many questions as we have, but the door does not close on us after this presentation, so let us know if you ever have questions following up after this. So again, water quality standards, there are 3 parts. EPA considers all 3 parts to be water quality standards, One hot tip here is that we updated our regulations in 2015. So if those of you have been working on standards before this, you want to go back and make sure you check to see what updates there are so that you can make sure that you're following the latest and greatest of our regulations. But when we look at the 3 parts, uses or designated uses, these are how you want your water to be used. And the baseline, again, you must have fishable, swimmable uses, but there are also other kinds of uses like domestic water supply, tribal cultural uses. Those would be other examples of uses that you can designate for your waters. And then you set the criteria of what you believe are the quality necessary to protect those uses. These criteria can be either numeric, like 35 CFU of bacteria to protect recreation, or narrative, like no toxic and toxic amounts, or free from floatable debris. Those would be examples of narrative statements. And finally, you're required to have anti-degradation component to your with your standards. And the anti-degradation policy basically explains how you will prevent, sets the expectation that water quality cannot be degraded, even if it's already better than your existing standards or your new standards that you're proposing. You can't degrade water quality. So that's your policy that would help you do that. So now that you kind of are reminded what we are looking for, or what we consider water quality standards, and we would act on all parts of these as at EPA, I'm going to toss the ball over to Terry, who as coordinator will walk you through some of the good tools and tips for getting to the meat of your standards packages.
So this is the model water quality standards template. It's a tool that's designed to help tribes develop water quality standards. I'm going to go through the table of contents because that's an easy way to sort of describe the parts that are in there. And the template is an annotated outline that helps you work through all of the parts. And so the first one seems pretty basic. It's, you know, name the waters in the reservation. And this is telling EPA and others what water bodies do these standards apply to. So if it's not included in that, then you need to tell us. Next one, it has a list of definitions for 36 different terms that are commonly used in water quality standards. Things like acute and BMPs and those types of things. Some of them are going to be useful for you. You can pick. That's a clue to the next one. It has some designated use, and it sort of talks you through the designated uses. I know sometimes we use the word beneficial uses. That's kind of California speak. EPA speak is designated uses. As Tina said, the baseline is fishable, swimmable. And just to note, when we say fishable, we also mean aquatic life. So that's sort of a key point there. But stay on. Okay. The designated uses are really where you define what it is that you want to protect. And it may be, drinking water, municipal water supply, tribal subsistence, cultural uses, all those types of things. This is where you define it. And one note, you don't have to have the use apply to every water body. So you can kind of pick and choose where your other uses apply, but the fishable, swimmable have to apply to them all. The template has some narrative water quality criteria that you could use. I think these are a beginning. This is one example where I'd recommend you shop around to some of the other states because they have some better narrative water quality criteria that are in the template. So as you know, numeric criteria are quantitative values that are designed to protect the uses that you define. EPA has developed criteria under Clean Water Act 304A. We call them 304A criteria. And these are these numbers that EPA has developed to protect, the fishable and swimmable uses. So they are there, they're there for use. The template actually has downloadable versions of these that you can actually choose and put into your standards. And if you have those, then those will be approvable. The next part. It has an anti-degradation policy that you can use and draft and make it yours. It also has anti-degradation implementation methods, and this is actually part of this is new. This came in 2015. The agency realized that an anti-degradation policy without implementation methods really wasn't working, and so we're asking that states and tribes have anti-degradation implementation methods that are consistent with their anti-degradation policy. Next slide. Next slide. One more. So these three provisions here, mixing zone policy, compliance schedule authorizing provisions, and water quality variance authorizing provisions are tools. And these are tools that can affect the implementation of the criteria themselves. And so we consider these tools, if you have them in your water quality standards, to be water quality standards. Typically, these tools are used primarily for permit NPDES permits, but there is no harm for you to have them in your water quality standards, and there may be some benefit in 401 land. So those are just my little tips. So hot tip, always start with the template, and if you already have standards, maybe look at this template to make sure that your standards have all the right pieces. And then try not to copy other folks. I know that's fairly common. I think we recommended it before. I think the challenge there is sometimes people copy stuff from other states or tribes, and they're copying not only the good stuff, but the stuff that we disapproved. And so that just means we have to disapprove you. And so I think it's better to start with the template, look at the criteria we have, and sort of go on from there and modify. Let's go to the next slide. This is a snapshot of the aquatic life criteria that came directly from the template. You can, copy and paste this and put this into your standards. There's criteria for both the freshwater and the salt. And we have acute criteria and chronic criteria. So acute are these criteria and maximum concentration, those are the acute, and the CCCs are the chronic. And we have the compounds on the, is that the left? That's the left. And we also have this thing called a CAS number. And the CAS number is sort of a unique identifier for the chemical. So if it's called, methyl death or methyl ethyl death, it'll still have the same CAS number. And so sometimes when we're confused what it is, we'll look at the CAS number. That will help us. I have a few more things to say here. So EPA has aquatic life criteria for about 25, 26, 28 different pollutants. I don't know the exact number. And some are numbers like you can see for acrolein, we have a number. And there's others like aluminum where we don't have a number, but instead have some sort of equation. And this is a multilinear regression. You download the criteria. There's a tool that you could use in Excel to establish what the criteria is. The aluminum criteria is a function of pH and hardness and dissolved organic carbon. And EPA is moving more and more to these types of criterion for metals. So many of you know that metals have been a function of hardness for a long, long time. And so those have equations with them. And many of you also know that ammonia is dependent on the pH and the temperature. And so those types of things are in there, and states and tribes have dealt with them in different ways. And that's not what we're going to talk about right now. I just want to give you a heads up on that. So, one final thing before we go. When EPA is looking at your numeric criteria, we're going to compare them to these numbers. So this is how we kind of establish as protective as. If you have a number that's less than these numbers, this is protective as, and we can approve it. If you have a number that's higher than these numbers, EPA will say, how did you get those numbers? We'll ask for justification. and we'll also need to ensure that it's protective of all the uses. Now we can go to the next slide.
Just Terry, the one thing I would add there is that the hot tip here is to always check for recommended criteria, because EPA does occasionally add new ones.
Thank you. I forgot that. So this is, I clipped this out of the template for human health. The human health has, they're basically, we have a water and organism and the organism. And so think of the water and organism as fish consumption and drinking water. And think of the organism only as just fish consumption numbers. And so just like the other ones, they have the compound, the CAS number, fishing and drinking, and fish consumption only. And the fish consumption rate default is 22 grams per day, and EPA's cancer risk level default for the carcinogens, and a lot of them are carcinogens, is 1 in a million, or 10 to the minus 6. So again, these are in the template. But the template also has a human health criteria calculator. And what this allows you to do is to choose an alternate fish consumption rate. We have 4 different ones here, the default and 3 others. And there's also a box that allows you to enter your own fish consumption rate. So that's kind of nice. So just so you know, the higher the consumption rate, the lower the values in the table will be. And yeah, you can also change the cancer risk level, which will change all of the numbers for the consumption rate. So EPA's default is 10 to the minus 6. If you make it tighter, 10 to the minus 7, the numbers will be lower. If you make it less tight, like 10 to the minus 5, the numbers will be 10 times higher. That's pretty much how that goes. So next slide. So now I want to talk about the process a little bit. So you've worked with the tribal clean water section, and you developed TES for water quality standards, and now you want to begin drafting water quality standards. And so this is a really great opportunity to begin engagement with the EPA water quality standards liaisons. We can help you, we can show you tools, we can help you explain things, and we can do drafts that you provide and find out if there's any problems with it and sort of help you along the way. So that's the great part. Once you've drafted water quality standards, you'll have to do a public notice, which will provide the draft that you're putting out for public notice, sort of a rationale why you're putting these things out and justification for those things. And you'll send out that notice to people within the tribe, but also people outside the tribe that may be affected by these standards. And the public notice must be provided to the people 45 days prior to your hearing. And the material needs to be provided 30 days in advance of that hearing too. So these are 2 provisions that a lot of us didn't know about 3 or 4 years ago, and it became aware of that. And so many of you are probably still thinking it's a 30-day public notice and a 30-day, that's no longer the case. One more. So, 30 days is not a whole lot of time. That's the minimum required. But, if you do get comments on your draft, it may take some time to respond to those comments and make any edits that might be necessary because of those comments. So just as a little tip, sometimes it takes longer than the minimum. So, the adoption hearing occurs, per your tribal laws. And then you have to get some sort of certificate. We call it the Attorney General certificate because that's what states do. But in tribe, it's just some entity that ensures that the tribal water quality standards were established, consistent with tribal law. And then finally, you get ready to submit to EPA. And hot tip, keep your liaisons up to date on any changes that are made or when you're about to submit them to give us time. The final submittal is also important because it's not just give us the standards, you also have to give us the public notice, any comments, response to comments, the certificate that was consistent with tribal law, and yeah, that's it. So my pitch was just to let you know that we're here to help you, and so take advantage of it, because we will let you know where to start. We'll spot any potential issues that you'll have. We'll provide resources to you and let you know where to go. Things like the template, the Water Quality Standards Handbook are really excellent sources, much easier to read and understand than the regs. So we'll explain the regs and regulations if you need. We'll review drafts, we'll provide feedback, we'll check to see if things are protective or not. We'll help you navigate the process and ensure that the process and submission requirements are met. But you got to give us time to do this. You can't expect us to do this overnight because this is a long list. Okay, that's my part. I'll give you back to Tina.
So once you've done all your crazy in-depth back and forth between your water quality standards people and my water quality standards people here, liaisons here at EPA, and you're pretty sure you have a really good package and you're ready to submit it, you submit it to us, and then what happens? The question is, what does EPA look at and what is our process? So we wanted to give you a quick preview as to what we go through here and remind you that we can only meet our timelines, which are statutory, if we've had really solid early engagement. So we kind of have to know what's coming in order to be able to get this done. So once we get your package, we review it, and we have either 60 days to approve your standards or 90 days to disapprove. And these timelines are laid out in the Clean Water Act. And I can tell you that we strive to meet these timelines. Some packages are simpler in that they're straightforward. They may be only 1 or 2 criteria or a use change, and we can tend to move on those a little bit faster. Others may be super complex, like for example, Navajo's package that we just acted on in the last week, which had 700 or 800 different water quality actions standards within that package. And so they can take longer to do. And that's why us knowing what's coming is really important, because we can get started before it lands with us. And I would say it's not typical that we have disapprovals, because we have typically enjoyed really good early engagement. Sometimes things fall through the cracks, and we do find errors or issues with packages that are ultimately submitted, in which case it's not, what we tend to do is a partial approval, partial disapproval. So those things that are approvable in a package can still move forward, and we would only disapprove specific criteria that would need to be amended moving forward. And then, if we do disapprove, the Clean Water Act sets the expectation that EPA would promulgate the standard promptly after that. I could say this hasn't been done in Indian country, and almost never even happens with the states either. It does happen sometimes, but pretty rarely. So our goal is, though, to support you in developing your standards. So we don't need to promulgate a different standard to be protective of your use. But when we're looking at your package, and just to reiterate some of the things that Terry was talking about, the fundamental question that we're looking at is, do the standards meet the requirements? Sorry. So do the standards meet the requirements of the Clean Water Act, and do they meet EPA's implementing regulations? And so these are those regulations that we sort of previewed before, and you'll find them all as you start to develop yours. So within that, do you have fishable, swimmable, designated uses? Are the criteria protective of the uses and based on sound science? So again, if you use criteria different than those that are EPA recommended criteria, can you support them? Or there are also, of course, some uses for which EPA does not have recommended criteria, in which case, again, we would need to see the justification as to why that criteria is protective of the use. Do you meet all the anti-deg policy and implementation method requirements, as well as the general implementation policies such as variances, mixing zones, compliance schedule provisions? These are all considered water quality standards, so we would be looking at all of these. Did you meet the public participation requirements, and is the package complete? And I just highlighted a couple of things, you know, Terry alluded to others. Do we have your certification that the standards were adopted pursuant to tribal law? If you're making revisions to existing standards, have you given us a strikeout version so that we can see the changes between the new and the old? And all of the other pieces of supporting information that Terry mentioned, as well as others. You know, our duty does not stop here. There are also other legal obligations for which EPA is obligated to review for all water quality standards actions. An important one, of course, to us is tribal consultation. We do enter tribal consultation on all water quality standards actions for those tribes that may be affected by the proposed standards that are before us. So some of you may have recently been invited to consult on packages that are before us. You will see more of these in the future, and certainly tribes can consult on other tribe standards as well. So again, we generally look as upstream, downstream, nearby vicinity who may share cultural uses. We are still, you know, honing this process and trying to make sure that we are reaching everybody. But of course, we want to start this process early, so when we know that you're getting close to a package and we have a good understanding about what you're proposing, that's about the time early in the process before you formally submit your package to us that we would invite to tribal consultation, so that we know who we need to consult with during that time frame to make sure that we get valuable feedback that is incorporated into our decision. And then we also have obligations under the Endangered Species Act. So specifically for aquatic life criteria, we need to make sure that no threatened and endangered species are going to be adversely affected or are unlikely to be adversely affected by any proposed water quality standards that we would approve. And we do biological evaluations. We work with the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service. We need to get their concurrence that they agree with our finding that either there's going to be no effect on these species, or it may affect, but not likely to adversely affect. If we were looking at criteria that we thought would adversely affect, I can't imagine that we would be able to approve those. So again, this is where early in the process, we want to work with you on your criteria so that we don't get too far down the road of proposing criteria that would not be protective of threatened and endangered species. So with that, we just wanted to sort of wrap up with a couple of things. You know, we see some common issues with packages, so we wanted to give you a hot tip of things you want to avoid. And this is going to sound like a broken record. We are happy to keep breaking this record, which is not sharing early drafts with the liaison, not keeping EPA up to date on changes or different needs or priorities that you may have. Sometimes we see packages that don't have fishable, swimmable uses, especially if these are your new standards package, your first standards package. You will need, this is your baseline. You need to make sure that you have fishable, swimmable uses. Standards not being protective of the use. So sometimes a criteria is too high to protect or too low to protect the use. Missing scientific justification. So again, if you stray from the EPA recommended criteria for human health or aquatic life, so those fishable, swimmable criteria, then you would need to have justification for that, especially even for other uses that we don't have recommended criteria. Downstream uses not protected. So waters do not stop at borders. And so we do need to make sure that downstream uses are protected by any changes in water quality standards. An example of that might be, for example, in the state of California, their mercury criteria is more stringent than our EPA recommended criteria. So if a tribe's waters flow into the state of California, you would want to make sure that the standards that you adopt are also protective of the uses as they're laid out in the California standards, as one example. Missing anti-degradation implementation method. And again, because this is something new that came in 2015, if you started your package before that, which is not unusual, it can take a long time to develop standards. There are just things that could be missing in packages that are now required. And not enough time for public notice and comment. So Terry mentioned that we used to think it was 30 days. We've clarified that it's 45. And just understanding the amount of time it takes to get through that public notice process it sort of gives a realistic time frame on how long it really takes to develop standards. And our final hot tip is to remind you that we're here to help. Give us a call, let us know, but a great place to start is the EPA website, which does have all of our resources on it, including our regulations, guidance requirements. It has a specific section of the website that is set aside for tools for tribes, and which is where you'll find the water quality standards template, which, as Terry mentioned, is annotated and really provides you the information you need to plug in and get a good first draft of what you're looking for. It has our EPA 304A or recommended criteria tables for human health and aquatic life. And it also has some training and reference materials. And I would point you specifically to the EPA Water Quality Standards Handbook. Your liaisons will be using this handbook to help them remember. We don't shockingly know every in and out of every standard and every type of criteria, so we will use this handbook. Also, there's a National Water Quality Standards Academy. The ones this year were canceled, and so they're doing them short versions, intro versions virtually, and they're hoping to begin them again, pandemic notwithstanding, in May. So we'll see how that goes, and that's usually a week-long course. And then there's also the Tribal Water Quality Standards Academy, and I would remind you that we were planning also to have a Region 9 Tribal Water Quality Standards Academy in 29 Palms earlier, I think in May this year, that we again had to cancel. We are virtually hoping to deliver that to you later. But there will be always training opportunities, and if there are needs identified with all the tribes a lot of tribes within Region 9, we can certainly work with our tribal water section to put together, customized what areas need a little bit more support. They don't have to be the full soup to nuts how to do standards, but maybe we just want a aquatic life criteria session or something like that. So it's again letting us know what is needed so that we can work on trying to deliver that to you and support. And with that, I would say I thought I had added my email address on here. I will make sure that gets posted on mine and Terry's email addresses get posted on the conference website so that you can find us. Although I go by Tina Yin, my email is yin.christina, and Terry goes by Terry Fleming, but his email is fleming.terrence. So we like to keep things tricky for you, but our goal is to help you find us so that we can help you get standards that you want effective on your on your reservations for Clean Water Act purposes specifically. So with that, I'm going to go over to questions, and I would, ask my team, the Water Quality Standards Liaisons, to turn back on their cameras, and then also ask maybe Danielle, you could start with if there's a theme of questions that are popping up in the chat box, you can let us know, and otherwise we'll figure out on Zoom how to call on people.
Okay, perfect. So one of the first questions that seems to have a theme is Camille Merchant wrote, if there are no fish in the streams, no consumption, do you still need to include a human health criteria table? And she followed it up with, because there still may be ingestion of water via contact recreation.
Terry, I saw you nodding your head there. Did you want to jump in?
So I saw in the chat there was also one about the swimming use. What happened?
Oh, I'm sorry. I unshared the screen because I thought it might be helpful to see the questioners.
Okay. And so I think first level I should say that you must have fishable, swimmable, asterisk, unless you do some sort of what they call a use attainability analyses to establish that the use cannot be attained. And so, you know, that usually happens to the swimming, which is the second question. But I don't think I've ever heard anyone on the fish consumption. Diane, do you have an answer to that? I often go to you with questions when I don't know.
I've not heard of that. You have to do a UAA.
Okay, yeah.
And for UAAs, we have criteria that would qualify you. There are 6 options for you to do a use attainability analysis to say, you know, we can't, this use is not appropriate because, and it's one of those 6 factors. And it sounds like what you're proposing may fit in that.
You know, one of the other things that we've sort of said is, you know, we have like maybe 20-ish aquatic life criteria, and we have a ton of human health criteria. And so EPA has often made a statement that in the absence of aquatic life criteria, we will sometimes use the human health criteria to deem protectiveness of the aquatic life. So that's another kind of answer.
Danielle?
Great, thank you. So Lisa Gover from Campo says, can you describe what risk management decisions EPA disagreed with that were made by the state of Washington related to the development of its human health criteria and its decision not to incorporate all components of the updated 2015 Clean Water Act Section 304A HHC recommendations? The rule published in the Federal Register by EPA May 13th, 2020 mentions this. The HHC that was the subject of the disagreement was a standard based on fish consumption rate of 175 grams per day. This is an FCR supported by and borne out by tribes in that state.
I wish I could answer that. So I only followed that from afar. And I know there was a lot of litigation around that. Matt has his hand up. Excellent.
So I can speak to part of this because one of the jurisdictions I work with is dealing with a question around fish consumption rate. I can't speak specifically to the first part of the question, which was about the Washington decision. But in 2015, EPA using the NHANES data out of the CDC, I know all the acronyms, I'm so sorry for that. We've looked at the fish consumption data across the country and have updated from a 17.5 gram per day consumption to a 22 gram per day fish consumption rate when we developed the updates for the 2015 304A recommendations. So those are that human health criteria table. So to that second part of your question, Lisa, that is part of what was driving some of that conversation. And as our states, tribes, and territories are going back and reviewing their human health criteria, they should be looking at that change in the fish consumption as needed, or at least giving us some feedback when they do their trend review saying, we're not going to adjust it because we have this other data set that suggests otherwise. And Terry might have an addendum to that too.
I do not. I've just said, Susan or Diane, did you follow the Washington human health criteria?
This is Diane. I did not. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry too.
Yeah, well, this might be one of those that we put a pin in, and this lets you know we don't already know the answer to everything, but one of the things we do as a team is that when they come up and they are relevant for our tribes and need to move on, we will figure out the answers.
Great, thanks. So the next question is, how do you justify swimming uses? What if there is only enough water to wade in, or not deep enough to swim, but deep enough for pet dogs to swim? Small children can swim in shallow water that adults would avoid. How is this taken into account for?
Yeah, I'll just say this thing I was referring to in the first question. If you don't have enough water to justify swimming, then states and tribes can do what's called the use attainability analysis. And if there's no water to swim in, it's a pretty easy UAA. There are 6 factors that are in 131.10G, and you can look at those and find the one that's most appropriate.
I would just add there also that swimming uses, so swimmable does not only mean being able to, you know, race Michael Phelps in the water. It also means human contact. It could be recreation in or on the water. So that's how it's defined. So kayaking is also a swimmable use. You know, so there are other uses that are considered swimmable that are not actually, you know, floating, if that helps. And that's where, like, each fishable, swimmable, each of them can have many, many definitions of that. You know, a fishable use, as we talked about, as aquatic life, might also be a use might be protection of threatened and endangered species, for example, or a specific kind of thing. You know, so it can be very specific, and they can be very broad, the uses.
One way to think of the fishable uses, or the swimmable use, I'm sorry, is that it's actually the designated use is actually called water contact recreation. So if there's a risk of getting a certain amount of water in your mouth, then that's considered water contact recreation. So it's not just if you can swim.
So I'm going to sneak this question in because it was asked in a different session, and I'm just looking at the time. So Ryan Marshall writes, what are some tips or directions in looking to make and adopt water quality goals, not EPA approved standards? Any tips on the changes in the process?
I'm not familiar with the term water quality goals as it relates to, say, your particular tribal standards, but is this question related to when there are tribal water quality standards that are not for Clean Water Act purposes? Is that the context here?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so we don't have water quality standards. When I came into the program, I kind of had to determine that we did need to figure something out or establish some goals. And so it was a process of determining, because I'm in California, whether we use local California board, EPA regulations, or I think there was one other, and then EPA recreational standards. Because so I just been kind of going through the 3 of them and cookie cutting pieces together. And then I spoke with my project manager, and he said that I didn't need to move towards standards, which was a big relief. But now I'm kind of at a standstill with trying to figure out what the next steps are.
So I think an important nuance here is, you know, Clean Water Act standards, you know, when we say standards effective for Clean Water Act purposes, you know, they're not self-implementing for having a standard. So that is, in essence, what you're setting as your water quality goals to be. And so unless you have dischargers or permits that may be affected by a Clean Water Act regulation, that's true. You may not need Clean Water Act effective standards to protect your waters or to say what the quality of your waters you want to be. In terms of helping you with the technical background and information for developing those goals, you know, for sure, some of the information that we've set out as EPA recommended criteria is a good place to start, as well as what you're looking at is your upstream and downstream neighbors are also good places to start. But again, unless you're going to need the Clean Water Act purposes lens, your tribe is welcome to develop whatever standards they want, and my team is here to help you with those to the extent we can. So we do need to prioritize those TAS tribes submitting standards for Clean Water Act purposes. You note there's only 8 of us, and there are 148 tribes, as well as our 4 states and 3 territories. So our intent is to try to give as much technical support as we can, where we can, and that's where rolling it up into maybe trainings where we can offer support to more than one tribe at a time might be the way to go for this kind of thing.
I've been looking out to other local tribes as well on this, and now it's very nice to have you guys come in for support and actually talk to the Water Quality Standards Department directly, because that was a question of my project manager. So, yeah.
Terry, follow up?
Yeah, so just one follow up. You know, I often ask myself, why should a tribe want water quality standards? You know, if you don't have NPDES or 404. And, you know, if I was a tribe, I would want it just for one simple thing, 401 certifications. So that gives you the ability to place requirements on federal discharges that happen in or around your tribe. So if it's an NPDES permit that's upstream of your tribe and it's going to affect your waters, they have to protect your tribal waters, right? So if your numbers are lower than, you know, whatever the state discharging into you, it has to be protective of that. And it also applies to like 404 and I think even FERC relicensing. So I think that's the key. It's your ability to influence others.
We have a very simple watershed, just to finish up, and so that's where I would like to move towards water quality standards if that seems to be the solution. Thank you. Thank you for the information.
Sure. Danielle, I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Okay, so the next question, do ephemeral water systems get placed into any special category? Because beneficial uses would be on a seasonal schedule rather than always available for beneficial uses.
That's an question.
Matt Bolt.
Well, I was going to say, do we want to loop in the ephemeral question and then the additional question there about specific tribal uses? Because those kind of touch on some similar things. Oh, am I going to talk now? All right. I'm sorry, Terry. I stole your thunder. So what I was thinking is these two items that you brought up, the ephemeral water systems, seasonal uses, and then these more traditional uses might be what we refer to as non-101A2 uses. Those are things that are outside of that box of fishable, swimmable, that you can add on to your water quality standards. Some of your other tribes that are a little bit, and states that have standards already have things like agricultural and livestock and irrigation standards, and those are considered non-101A2 uses. And those are things that we can work with you on developing.
Yeah, the only thing I would add on that is, you know, many ephemeral streams do have aquatic life that needs to be protected. So I would just sort of throw that in as a caveat.
Next, Danielle.
So Mervyn Wright is asking, what is the distinction between navigable and swimmable, and how are they applied under the Clean Water Act?
You want me to take that?
Sure. Yeah, what he said.
Yeah. So if you look at the Clean Water Act regs, Clean Water Act, standards apply to waters of the U.S. That's the term of art that's used. The navigable waters rule that many of you have heard of is a method that EPA has established to determine whether waters are waters of the U.S. or not. So I just wanted to make that distinction real quick. So waters of the U.S., that's what standards apply to. And if they're not waters of the U.S., they don't apply to. But we're not getting involved into the whole waters of the U.S. Aspect of it.
So I think then the distinction there is what's the difference with between swimmable, and again, we would define swimmable. When we say swimmable, it's to encapsulate contact recreation. So that's the way we think of the swimmable.
Yeah, thank you.
I think one last question, and then Danielle, can you let us know about the questions that we missed? Will they be available for later response after this session? Because we can't get to all of them.
So I have tried to save the file and I have
Okay.
screenshotted the questions. So I will
Great.
get that. I will have that for you.
Thank you.
I think we're good. I just know that Jeff, where's your question? He requested that in addition to a water quality standards template, a water quality standards triennial review template form would also be appreciated. We'll just make that note.
Yeah, that's a good note.
So we have 1 minute left. I don't know if any tribe out there wants to share their recent experience. Probably we don't have quite enough time for that, but we do invite your feedback for how it is to work with us and things that we can do better to support getting through this, can be onerous task. And again, we're looking at, for those of you that have standards, revising your standards or at least reviewing them every 3 years through that public process. And then also we know a lot of tribes are just starting on their first standards packages. And one clarification I would make is that sometimes standards packages get submitted along with their TAS application. That doesn't come to my team per se. So it's like after you get your TAS or when you're near getting TAS, you want to make sure that you get a liaison from my office to be working on with that package, because our project officers for our 106 and 319 grants, they are dealing with sometimes a high volume of deliverables, and they won't necessarily, know that what you're submitting is for something that you want feedback on. So just make sure that that kind of thing is clear when you submit so that we don't lose your work. With that, we're right on time. Well, thank you everybody for coming. We look forward to meeting and working with all of you in the future. And I'll make sure that my contact information goes up, and for sure, your tribal PO can help you find us.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.